Oh man, it's been a while since we didn't have a guest.
That's true.
Oh yeah. So I want to get super deep into business value. That's what I want to do, because you hear about this on Agile teams and you hear about this, I don't know, across the internet, and nobody really goes super in depth about business value, what it is, what it means, how to do it. And why it's important to me is because every program I've been in the last couple of years, I try to measure the team's progress in story points, because that's the way that most teams that I work with estimate. And then I try to estimate their progress in flow, so the number of stories they complete. And then I also try to take a snapshot of business value. I try to push them to using business value and actually adopting it, and then try to get them to give me business value completed over the course of the sprint, so I can track as the sprint goes on, the burn down. I can look at the burn down in terms of business value. I like that a lot, because over the terms of the burn down, it lets me see like how quickly, again, assuming you have like advanced DevOps practices and you're delivering to production, yeah. Assuming that, you can show, well, early in the sprint, we knocked out the biggest business value things first, and you'll see a big drop. And then over time, you'll kind of chew through the rest of the things in the sprint that maybe are not necessarily in the goal. Maybe they're stretch goals. But I like using business value for that specific reason, because I like to see that we're knocking big things out quickly in the sprint.
Yeah, so a couple of things I want to say about business value. First of all, you don't really see business value being used all that extensively out there. Predominantly what I find is this focus on story points and velocity and all those things that I've in the past referred to as vanity metrics, basically. And the reason for my citing those metrics is that they can be gamed. Yeah. And they can be gamed because it's who estimates stories, who decides on what ends up being velocity. It's the dev team. It's not the product owner or anybody from the business, really. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, where they're pretending to be agile in all the wrong ways, they say, we're tracking your velocity, team, and we want to see it, go up, right? And right. If that's what they're measuring, that's what they get. And aren't they doing well, right? Yeah. But a business person, a product owner, anybody from the business side could look at that and say, I see the graph going up mm-hmm. on velocity, but mm-hmm. I'm really not getting more value. Mm-hmm. In fact, sometimes it will detract from you getting even the same level of value, because the focus is on churning through more story points. So for the reason that you cited, I like that, because you are one person who's on the product side, right, assigning business value mm-hmm. to the work that the team is being directed to. And essentially you're doing nothing more than saying, hey, as the representative from the business, I believe the most important work is at the top of this list, and I'll assign that a certain value. The next most is this, etc. At the bottom here, that's mildly interesting, but not really all that valuable to me. Mm-hmm. So while in the sprint, you're right, it would be interesting to see if the team is actually burning through the highest business value items first, right? But as a product owner, you don't really care if they don't accomplish all work items on which there is a business value, mm-hmm. right? A non-zero business value. You don't care because they've already delivered the top N items that you deemed were the highest business value items to you. Yeah. Now, extrapolate that outside, right, from the sprint and go, here's my product backlog. Mm-hmm. Are they delivering the highest business value across the sprints, across the product backlog? The reason why that's important is because, who knows, maybe you'll run out of budget at some point, mm-hmm. right? So when you do, it's not an if usually, right, in IT projects. So when you do, you can say, in the budget we expended, we achieved the maximum amount of business value. Yeah. What else can you do for your company, right? So I think for all those reasons, business value is a really good metric, but unfortunately not all that widely used.
I don't think it's understood. Because, again, I don't think it's trained in the certifications and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Because most people have never worked with it before. They've never been in an organization that kind of pushes them to work with it before. So, right. I feel that is, let's run through that now. I think we can make a real short, specific podcast to the purpose of how to use business value, why you should use it, how to use it, and what you can expect when you do use it. So, business value. I've had a conversation with almost every team I've ever been on about using business value, and the normal conversation that happens is something along the lines of this. Brian, here's the things that we think we can do in the sprint, and we're going to bring it to you, and I will say, okay, cool. Well, that has a business value of 10, and that has a business value of 3, and these other things have a business value of 0. And then they will confront me on it to say, well, why do you think that it has a business value 0? And I will say, because all the customer cares about is that their software is working and they can use it. They don't care that you send it to their test environment. They don't care that you tested XYZ and it worked or whatever. They don't care that you did an integration test to make sure that the full end-to-end solution worked. That doesn't matter to the customer. So when I assess business value, I assess business value from the perspective of the customer of the story, the customer of that story.
Yep. The consumer of the story at the end of the day.
Consumer of the story, yeah.
I think that's valid. I also can somewhat see the other side of the argument where
Sure.
the team is tracking, whether it's business value, probably business value, right, from the perspective of getting better. So every time you're delivering software, there's an expectation by the customer that it should be of a certain quality. But what if it isn't? What if you're falling short? So the notion would be from a product owner to say, I assigned this item a specific number, whatever it was, of business value, but I only received, less than that, right? It was X. I received delta X because it was of suboptimal quality.
Yeah.
So this is really about improving on the team side to say, listen, we've got to deliver what we're committing to. We're committing to X on this piece of work here, and if it was less than X.
Yeah.
So why was that? And they can have a discussion around that, driven around quality, whatever it was, misunderstandings, plethora of reasons, but get better so you don't repeat that again. So I can see the argument for tracking that within the team that is not directly from a customer's perspective, because the customer is expecting it to work flawlessly all the time. But I just want to go back. Why is it not, all that widely used? To your point, it isn't really trained upon in many, in any really, except for one or two maybe, exceptional kind of cases.
Is it trained in any model or I can't think of any certification that trains in business safe aside from safe.
Safe does, yeah.
Yeah.
But you're already at that point, talking about scaling really. But safe does.
I know. Yeah,
and only in the context of delivering at a program level, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I hate that it's wrapped up in scaling because one single team, one single product owner, one single team should be doing business value. I would say if they're not going to do anything else, if they're going to be online with hashtag no estimates or whatever crazy. Did you see the new Vasco Duarte thing that he's on board with?
Yeah, I saw that.
Hashtag no backlogs. Yeah. Have you seen that?
I saw that.
Oh,
it
man.
Sent a shiver down my spine.
Oh, man. I was like, I need to go investigate what it really means. I'm sure he's got a TED Talk. But anyway, that
no doubt.
Side discussion of what I want to talk about. The point,
even a single team should be doing this.
So Safe has it, but it has it at like a program level that the management comes in and assesses business value or whatever, but it's tied up in the PI planning. I don't want to get at the scale level. I want to ingrain it as a concept down here at a single team level.
I agree with that. I think Safe also misses the bus there because not only is it at the program level, the emphasis is on efficiency. Right, because they say, well, if you've got 5 teams scaling up, you plot the business value delivery of each of the teams, but collectively they should be between 80 and 100%.
Oh, I see.
So they're looking at it from that perspective.
I see.
But what if a team is only at 70%, but it's the right 70%, as deemed by the product owner? What if it's the right 70%?
Well, let's stop here for a second and ask if you have, like in my example, where my team is like, oh, we need to do an integration test that all this software is working. Maybe an end-to-end integration test is not the best example here. Right. Maybe a better example here is deployment of my software to a test environment or to production. Maybe that's a better example. It's like maybe if I don't have good, solid CI/CD practices in place, roll my software to the next environment that I'm going to be testing on. But for me, again, I'm going to go back to business value 0, because the customer doesn't care that it's difficult for you or not difficult for you to roll software from environment to environment. So the business value is 0.
Absolutely agree. The customer shouldn't care that you're even rolling from one environment to the other. All they care about is what have you given me? Right? At the end of the chain there. So yes, from a customer perspective, I agree in that example. The business value as such is zero until you've delivered something, and then it's the quality of that delivery that matters. So I agree with that. I think a lot of teams get hung up in these kinds of task-oriented work items that they ascribe business value to because their processes aren't mature. Like their deployment process isn't mature. They're doing a lot of manual work, let's say.
Specifically because for me, I'm thinking about Jira. If you're using Jira, like it could be, and you have a story that says create some functionality, a sub-task, even if you don't have CI/CD practices, and you have to manually pajama party roll that out to an environment. If you have a story that says add functionality XYZ, you could have a subtask under add functionality XYZ that says roll this out to environment A, roll this out to environment B, roll it out to environment C, and then only after it's in environment C can the customers get to it. Well, I would argue you can't claim those points, you can't call it done until after it's environment C because the customers can't get it. You know what I mean? If the customers can only get to it when it is in environment C, then like that needs to go in your definition of done. And I'm talking about subtasks. I'm talking about pieces of a story. Whereas I could see certain teams might have the story be roll it out to environment C. And that's what I'm pushing back on. I'm saying that has no business value.
That story should not exist as a standalone story.
Yeah.
That story should be absorbed into a story that says develop whatever it is.
Whatever
XYZ.
feature, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and therefore, like to your point, be part of the definition of done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Who assigns the business value?
That's an interesting question. So if you've got an organization where the product folks understand that notion, the concept of assigning business value, they would be the best entity to do that. And the reason is they're outside of the dev team. If you let the dev team do it, then you may as well stick with story points. Right? Business value just becomes another set of story points.
Sure.
Anybody from the business who cares about the product, the end delivery, they would be the ones to do that. Sometimes, though, you have to have a dialogue with the team for them to understand why it is what it is.
Hang on. Let me stop you for a second because I'm not trying to cut off or replace story points. Like the team can still do their story pointing, and we're running parallel. Like this whole discussion assumes we're running parallel with the story points because I deal with this a lot actually as a product person, where I'm like, you can do whatever. Because I feel as a product person, I'm like, you can use whatever estimation you want as development team, assuming that you're not in a bad place where your velocity has been co-opted by your management. Assuming you're not in that bad place, assuming that you have a velocity, it's being used by your team to determine how much you can pull in and to make an informed decision. Okay, I as a product person, I don't care at all. When I look for planning, I'm going to look at your velocity in terms of points. If you're doing hours, I guess I'm going to look at hours, and then I'm also going to look at you and look down on you because you're using hours and you're just causing pain to yourself. Or if you're using flow, if you're just using the number of stories per sprint. It's like whatever metric you're using, that's cool. I'm going to look at that, but that has almost no influence on the amount of business value you could potentially take into a sprint or not take into a sprint. Because like we might decide in a sprint that we want to get a bunch of environments ready, or we might want to break down some technical blockers that don't necessarily have business value, but that we as a business decide that we need to do. Like a good example is between podcasts. I talk about back in my career when I ran a VM farm.
Right.
Like when I ran a VM farm, when you would get different servers ready to spin up instances of, you'd have to take some time to get those servers ready to spin up. So you I need a mail server, or I need a database server, or I need a Windows 2012 server, or whatever. I have to take a snapshot of that and then hold it in reserve to spin it up. That is getting ready for some instance in the future. Mm-hmm. Maybe we've never had one before. I need to take one, figure out how to do it, figure out how to spin it up. That's business value zero because no customer cares about that. But in the future, when I want to deploy a new environment for a new test of some kind, now that I can do it on demand with a simple click or a simple template, because we took on that business value zero task 2 sprints ago, Now I can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a reason why I, as a product person, take on business value 0 tasks so that I can get myself, SAFe calls this technical runway or technical, I think it's technical runway.
It is.
I get myself that technical runway where in the future I can do things quicker. And then I can explain that to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wasn't suggesting the team drops using story points, but they're for the team, by the team, for the team, right? So nobody really should be judging them on that. And this whole idea of leadership, co-opting and looking at that and wanting him. I think there's value in, to use that word again, but I think it's of benefit to discuss why a specific story is the business value it is, if it should be questioned. Mm-hmm. But as you start to work with your team around this concept, they'll get to know you as a person, as a product person. They'll know why you're assigning that value. But before you get to that point, they might question it. They might say, well, hey, listen, as a team, we've decided that whole thing is 13 points worth of work. Mm-hmm. It's going to take us the whole sprint to do, or when we start looking at breaking it down and you go, that's business value 10 for me. So you do what you have to do. But then they have to be, I think it's valuable for them to understand why you're rating a business value of 10.
Yeah.
Right? Because when they understand it, they're going to tackle it that way, right? Giving it the due urgency that it needs. Mm-hmm. So that communication needs to happen as well. It's just going to make your team better going forward.
So who assigns the business? Is it specifically the product owner, and then the team kind of questions them and asks why and negotiates with them, or is it a cooperative thing?
I think for it to be cooperative, you have to have a very mature team, and because otherwise you got 6 people on your team. You potentially could have 6 opinions, and then the product owner ends up anchored with those numbers, or ends up being like a broker, right? Saying, well, it's not a 3 or a 4. How about we just say it's a 4? Yeah. Right? Or whatever it is. So it's better coming from one person. That's what I think. Yeah. It's better coming from that person, because the errors in deciding between, value n or n plus 1 or n minus 1, that comes out in the wash. In the big picture. Yeah. They're always going to either go a little higher, a little lower. Whatever they do is fine, because it's relative. I think overall it's much better if one person does it, because they own that. Yeah. And they're the ones that need to be then convinced at the end of the sprint, did they get what they asked for? Yeah. In terms of business value.
I'm a big fan of the product people being involved in a continuous discovery of air quotes requirements, or whatever you want to call it. But at what point would you assign a business value? This is not on our agenda, but I want to go here because I think it's important, because I have started in every team I join bringing engineers into the product discovery process. I think it's super important. If I ever work with a permanent, like every team I ever work with, like designers are they're like having an architect, like they're super high paid, you know what I mean? Sure. Like there's not many of them that go around, so you have to share them. But my developers on my team, I think it's important for them to understand why. And the earlier I get them involved in a requirement, the earlier they get to see the stage of the business is at, to understand why we're doing something. So the reason I bring that up is I think it would be interesting to try to figure out a way where you can involve developers in some kind of like planning poker, but for business value. I almost want to back off of that, because it's a suggestion, and then I'm going to assign the value I really want as a product person. And I hate to see people burn to be like, oh, I think this is a 1, and I'll be like, no, it's a 5. But I would think that like we're never going to be that far off, I don't think.
As long as you have development team members that understand the rationale for ranking something, a business value that it's ranked at, you'll be fine. But, sometimes you get people that say, well, that's going to be 2 days worth of coding, therefore it's not the right reasoning behind it. So technical folks often don't have the same viewpoint as a product person does. But over time, maybe you could get there, right? So bringing them into co-discovery sessions is a great idea, because they can be a source of innovation.
My discovery sessions usually are at the epic level. Again, to go back to Jira, we're at the epic level. We're not the story level yet. So we're talking about things that potentially could be, I don't know, 6, half a dozen to a dozen stories potentially in functionality. So I'm bringing them in an early version to basically bring them in to talk about like, what is my technical feasibility risk with this story? That's what I'm bringing them in to weigh in on. But while they're listening to the business case, use case, whatever you want to call it, while they're listening to the description that's being discovered in that meeting, they're thinking of it with a filter of how do I build this? How can I create a solution around this? And hopefully, if I've done my job right, they're somewhat walking in my shoes to try to think what value to the entire ecosystem of the business, what systems thinking value does this bring to the whole process? And I'm hoping that I involve them in that, because you never know where people are going to be later in their career, right? So like maybe they'll be like, well, I had this product person and they brought me in, and like I got to actually see a window into what the product person thinks of, but like, well, how am I going to sell it? Who's going to use it? How are they going to use it? How am I going to price this? I feel like specifically about this one. We'll get back to who actually assigns the business value and at what point it's assigned in a second. Like, I feel that at a certain point in my career in product was stunted because I was behind people who didn't let me into the conversation in any way, shape, or form about how to price software at all. Like how to price software packages, how to price software usage, that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, do you put a price to every API call? Do you put a price to every, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. Yeah. Like I was kept away from that because I was on the tech teams. Your opinion is not necessary for my business development discussion.
Yeah, I think that's very dangerous to do that, because you can't think of every scenario. So yes, while the dev team is wired to solutioning, that's fine. But somebody may raise a question. You know, like if we're doing it that way, how about this? Or whatever the question is. So it's, what are you missing as a product person that somebody else may think about? That's one thing. The other thing is, it's the risks, right? So you may not have thought of all the risks, which somebody could highlight. And that might change your influence on how you're going to direct the product. So I'm a big fan of bringing people in these discovery sessions. As far as asking their collective input on what business value it is. I think as long as you have the conversation around the end product, this is what it needs to do. Here are all the components. Now, given this component that we're working on, what business value is this? That's okay, right? Because now it's relative, because there are X components that are needed to create the product, as opposed to somebody getting bent out of shape about how many steps it should take for a user to log in. It can get down to minutiae with the dev team. Then the last thing is fostering the trust, right? Actually listening to them and not saying, well, you said it's a 1, but I'm saying it's a 5. It's, you said it's a 1, but did you think about these things as well? Right? And so, I think it's a good idea to involve them. Ultimately, though, you're the arbiter. Right.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think there's a huge opportunity there. I think of story points, for example. I'm going to talk about a concept. We'll kind of walk through acceptance criteria together, and then we'll say, okay, let's all vote, and then we vote, and assuming that you're voting in a way where people can see what number you're, like if we, assuming you're voting in a way where we're all at a table, and we turn a card over on our head. I don't know why we're playing this game, but we turn a card over on our head, and mine's a 13, and yours is a 2. And everyone else is like a 5 or whatever. Like, I don't need them to weigh in. You and I will discuss of like, well, why are we so far apart? I think you do business values, especially if you're going with a smaller scale of like 1 to 5. We can probably go down that road to say, well, why are you a 1 and I'm a 5? And even if the product manager and like the rest of the teams are like a 3, okay, I think even they would benefit from listening to those two people kind of talk through why they're so far apart, because like the other people can clarify, like, whoa, you're out on left field, like going down the road with this giant solution. We're not talking about that. We're talking about this specific thing, and you're just talking about this one little API usage, but we're talking about a much broader idea. I kind of think bringing a planning poker aspect into the discussion of business value, again, as long as your product person has some kind of facilitation, moderation kind of skill, and can move the conversation along and doesn't just burn you about, talking about things that are ultimately their decision, I feel you have a huge opportunity to pass along a lot of skill that otherwise developers wouldn't really get access to.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. I think most product owners would have those facilitation skills. If not, use your Scrum
I don't
Master.
know about that.
Use your Scrum Master. This isn't rocket science. It's communication.
Yeah,
at the end of the day.
I don't know about product. Product people will be like, it's a 5. Everyone else who doesn't want to agree it's a 5 is wasting my time. Like, so let's move on. Yeah, you're right. And like having a good facilitator to move it along, like, is worth its money in gold. The question that I want to ask though is, when you assign the business value, do you wait for your sprint planning to be over and then you start assigning the business value? So basically you're only assigning business value to things that are ready to be taken on, or do you do them in the backlog at estimation time, or like?
I really don't think you should wait until then, because now you're going to have this race condition where you say, these are the business value items, and the team's going to go, we have dependencies. We can't take on some of these because we have to do these other ones first. So if you do your best, right, to assign a business value in your product backlog, but then convey the message that it isn't one and done, right? That was our first pass.
Yeah.
Your first pass as a product person. So nearer when it's about to be taken into a sprint, you could revisit, and you could feel free to change that because now you know more.
Yeah.
Right. So now you've learned about some of those dependencies I mentioned. Right. Then you could say, well, okay, given those, now this one's more valuable to me. So not only obviously, product people know this, that they're the arbiters of where things go in the backlog, up and down. But you can also change the values of those business value points, the numbering system. You can change the numbers. And as long as you can say to the team, hey, listen, I know that I said it was a 5, but given what else we're doing, right, I'm willing to go down to a 4. Or whatever the scale is. You could do that. So they'll understand your way of thinking. I think that's critical. And on every project or with every product owner, that will vary. But they'll get to know how you work. Mm-hmm. Once they get to know how you work, they can be better aligned on the solution with you, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the long answer to your question, is try and do it first pass in the backlog, because what it allows the team to do is to look at the backlog and go, can't do that one, but that one we can do. Yeah. But look, it has no business value. That doesn't help. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
That kind of goes back to my original one of writing tasks that have no business value. It's like that. Sometimes the tasks that have no business value are essential to your product or your program. It's just they have not worked their way into your definition of done yet. So like it's kind of difficult, like if your team is manually deploying things, they want stories written for that. Guys, that has a business value 0. Like you really need to figure out how to do this stuff without it being a story.
They should write a story that says create the CI/CD, et cetera, so we don't ever have to manually deploy things. Yeah. So that's a one-time hit, but it's an investment, I guess.
It is an investment, and like at that point, you're coming away from your team and you're going to a different level in the organization. The level in the organization you might be approaching is like, well, if you're all developers and you all work for a CTO or whatever, like you need to bring and bubble up to that CTO, director of development, whatever, to say like, we really need to figure out how we automate this process, or we really need to figure out how we do automated testing or automated regression testing or whatever for the integration tests I was talking about before.
I had a wacky idea one time I want to talk about really briefly here. This was just way wacky, right? So I was thinking, we think about an integer value or whatever it is, right, for business value. But what about taking negative value, assigning it to a story that is absolutely no business value to you? Somebody, right, is deploying manually and they go, hi, this is a task. What business value is that, Mr. Product Owner? Right. -2. Right. So the reasoning behind that is to say to the team, listen, fix this negative stuff, right? Yeah. Get it to at least a 0, and then we can say it's no longer relevant. I don't know. It was wacky. I told you it was wacky.
No. I understand what you're saying though. Like,
it's my frustration of all these inefficiencies coming through here.
Yeah, my scale for business value is 0, meaning like a user doesn't value this. That's my 0. And stuff that would get labeled as a 0 would be like deployed to production or deployed to a test environment or whatever. It's like the user doesn't care about that. If you're going to roll a feature out that, when they click a button, it, shoots fireworks in the air or whatever. Like, okay, that's got that. The user cares about that. But the little asterisk next to that is I've written the story with the audience of the story, the single audience that cares about the story is the person it gives value to. So the tricky thing about this is, I mean, I guess I could write stories about like, oh, the internal engineer cares about things being rolled to environment, and under that banner, yeah, but I know, but like that's how people get around this. But I tend to think of the customer, the end customer, as the recipient and the person who cares about setting the business value. The question about scale comes into this, because I can see that's the other thing that the team would push back on is like, oh, what is 1 to 5 versus 1 to 10? Like, what does it mean? What scale do I use when I want to set a business value? Like, if I'm not doing any business value, I don't have the concept of the business value at all. I'm gonna take my Jira and add a new custom field because I love adding fields to Jira, and I'm gonna do it for the first time and I have business value, right? Jira doesn't let me set int with whole number int. Positive only, doesn't let me do it, but let's forget about Jira for a second. Right. But I'm going to set business value. I'm going to create it and add it to my system for the first time. Like, what is my scale? Like 0 to 5, do I want to not allow 0? Maybe 1 through 5, where nothing can have a business value 0. I don't know. Like when I have implemented it, I always have implemented it on a scale of 0 through 5, and the scale goes like this. 0 meaning this item doesn't have business value. Like it seems like a technical task or something that needs to be implemented, or possibly a one-time thing, like a throwaway type of task, or something that needs to be done because our definition of done is kind of like non-existent or hasn't been figured out. Or 1 through 5, meaning 1 is like it's like a slight convenience for the customer, with 5 being like a big impact on the customer's behaviors and business processes. That's the way I think of it. So right. 1 through 5 scale. Like I easily could do a 1 through 10 scale, but kind of in my opinion, I'm like, oh, it's like 1 through 5. Like 1 through 5 is like plenty enough. I could easily also see going 1, 2, and 3 kind of t-shirt sizing to be like small, medium, large. Like how big is an impact on the customer's behavior to give them this functionality? I could see that too. So what scales should we look at?
I think it's horses for courses, really. It doesn't matter what scale you use. You just don't want to go crazy on this stuff. I think start allowing 0, not allowing 0. Again, if you allowed 0, you could then perhaps coach your teams to say, let's get down to the point where we have no 0 value in the backlog, right? Because that's just waste, basically. Yeah. But if you go 1 to 5, the scale, the levels that you mentioned pretty much are understandable by most people. 5 might be the customer really cares about this and needs it. Yeah. Or you could say 4 is that level where they care about it, they need it. 5 is that delighter in the Kano model. Oh yeah. It doesn't matter. So you could do that. Or you could say 1 to 10.
There's 4 categories in the Kano model, isn't there? 4 categories?
I think more than, the 4 quadrants, yeah. It's 4 quadrants. But where I was going with the 1 to 10 thing is this, right? Oftentimes people get into these meaningless discussions of how do I determine if it's an 8 or a 9 or 6 or a 7? Yeah. It's like, just don't use a granular scale then, right? Just use 1 to 5. That's fine. Yeah. That's okay. The other, I want to just go back to who assigns just briefly. Wouldn't it be ideal if you had a user community, actual end users that get together? Maybe it's a user conference or something, and they determine most valuable features they need and assign their collective value to those. That becomes the input to the organization to deliver in that sequence, right? That will make your job easier as a PO to say, hey, this feature is the most valuable. I'm gonna focus on that first for our next release.
Yeah, you know what? In continuous discovery, the concept of user surveys is a tool that you can go out. So you could ask people like, hey, give me a rating 1 through 5. How valuable do you think this feature would be? I guess the magic in that would be picking the right users to be part of your survey group. But you could poll the audience to say, hey, I'm thinking about adding this new functionality to my API to let you pull this type of information. On a scale of 1 through 5, 1 being I probably won't use it, to 5 being I absolutely would integrate this as soon as possible into my business process. How likely are you to use this? And let your users give you feedback. Now, to do that, you would need a user pool that was likely to fill out your forms, and you know what I mean, you would need a good cross sampling of your business, right? If you were across, I guess, a disparate kind of market or whatever, but if you didn't have to deal with that, if you had a very distinct market of users who were kind of tied into your value chain,
that would be the whole pool, would be your target.
That would be the whole pool.
You're right.
Yeah,
you'd have to go across all market segments.
Yeah,
think about, is your product global, right? You got to get the right representation in there.
That'd be a great way to do it, though.
That would be a good way to do it. Now, today with all the tool sets that we have available, I don't think it's too expensive or prohibitive to do that.
I don't think so either. Like the roadblock you run into is if you're using Jira, for example, like now you got to get another tool to go do the surveys and to gather all that information. Like Jira doesn't easily let you expose the item and let people vote on it and stuff like that, even though their own internal tools let you do that.
But using third-party tools, I mean, that budget comes out of your getting to know the customer area, your marketing, your sales, maybe.
Maybe. The tool's pretty simple. It's pretty simple to create like a simple Google form or whatever to do that kind of. Yeah, you can do it. You have to do it a lot though. I mean, it depends on your user community that you've worked with.
I think that would be, if you think this through, that would be the second best way to do it.
Yeah.
The ideal way to do it is to actually see the behavior of your customers through the use of the product, and then you can see, this kind of customer always uses these features. The only thing missing there is you don't know what they're lacking, right? What they wish they was there. So you could see what's of value to them. You could turn that back around to them and say, we see you use this. If we offered this, would you use it?
Yeah.
And again, the 1 to 5 applies to that new thing that you're proposing to add to your product.
Boy, yeah. Oh, man. I would say for most product people and most products, that's a very advanced concept to say, I see that you liked or disliked this piece of the product that you're in. Let me serve up for you some kind of context-dependent survey to let you express your opinion. We're like a super advanced version of business value right now because in my career, so many people struggle with just the basic, even deciding to use business value at all is a huge decision. And then once you decide to use it, you want to use it, yes or no, then all these conversations happen afterwards. I feel only after you've gone all the way down this road and decided, like, I want to use business value, I like the input I'm getting, but I want to bring the customer into the discussion even more than I'm doing now. How do I go about that? Now we're down the road. And this is a great road to be down because now your ecosystem is back to where it should be in Agile, is like, let me bring the customer in as early as possible. Let me get their feedback as early as possible and make better decisions, basically.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think that there's benefits in assigning business value to your process steps as well. Because if you're introspecting and looking at your, doing some sort of value chain analysis to see what steps are valuable and what are not as valuable, instead of having a discussion around qualitative things, you can now say, based on our scale, the value of this step is less than the value of this step.
Yeah.
So should this now be shuffled out here or be tossed away?
Yeah.
But we digress from business value work, right? For the work that the team is producing.
Yeah.
Which is where we were going with the scale. So ultimately the scale really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
As long as it's used consistently and the people that are using it buy into the scale.
Well, let's say I pick 1 through 10. Let's say I settle on 1 through 10 as my business value. Let's say you're an Agile coach. I'm the product person. I've never used business value before. You've enabled the field for the first time. We decided we wanted to use it. Like, how do you coach me to pick a number between 1 and 10?
That's a great question. So first of all, before enabling that field, I'd have a conversation with you to figure out what you think about business value and how you think about business value.
Yeah.
And maybe I wouldn't enable a field that goes from 1 to 10 after that discussion. I might enable a field that goes from 1 to 4, 1 to 5, or it might not be a numeric field, right? Depending on where you're at with that conversation. But for the purpose of the discussion, if it was 1 to 10, the way I would coach you is this. I would say, once you decide to do a binary chop, essentially, is what I would say. Is this between 1 and 5? Or is it between 5 and 10? And let's assume that 10 is the highest business value, right? Well, if you've decided it's in the second half, between 5 and 10, then just use that and use your judgment to say, is it something that you must have, right? So it's in that quadrant in the bottom left on the Kano model. You just say, I have to have this.
Yeah.
Then it's okay for you to say it's a 10. But if you said it's a 9, it's not that far off a 10.
Yeah.
It just means you could wait a sprint for it.
Yeah.
Maybe, right? So 2 things there. Instead of a 10, you said a 9. Nobody dies on that hill. As long as you can explain to the team why something else was a 10 and this is a 9, right? And it might go something like, well, this one's a 10 because I have to have it now. This one's also just as important, but I could wait a sprint for that or 2, right? That's fine. Also, don't worry too much about deciding between a 6 and a 7. Just pick a number and go with it, because in the long run, it doesn't matter. It becomes your way of estimating this business value. So because you're the person doing it, you'll error if there is an error. I'm using the word in a statistical sense here. It's constant, right? So then it comes out in the wash. You're always saying a 7 when it's a 6. So it doesn't matter, right? That's what I'm saying. Just don't focus on it too much.
What would you, again, if we were trying to pick it up for the first time and decide that we want to do this, when would you coach me as a product person to decide the business value? Would it be part of my refinements? Would it be part of sprint planning? Would it be after sprint planning? Like when would we do this?
Yeah, so that's, again, a good question. I want to go back to the earlier conversation about making sure you assign some business value to those things that are at least 2 to 3 sprints out.
Yeah.
So that way the team can see what's coming and how you relevantly rank those things, right?
Yeah.
So you say, okay, well, I see that in the second sprint we have 5 things and the product owner's got 3 of those at 10. And the team can then give you feedback, because that sprint is, a sprint out, let's say.
Yeah.
Well, we can't take 3 that are 10s, right? Because we just don't have enough capacity to deliver that.
Yeah.
So that's early. And I'm getting to the answer. So if you do that, then you could obviously change the priority. Do it to the backlog, and then as you're getting closer to your sprints, take another pass through it. Essentially, here's what I would say to you as a product owner. If I was your Agile coach, I would say, when you're doing your refinement of the backlog itself, which you might be doing on your own or with people, doesn't matter. At that point, take a look at the business value too as you're shuffling the item up and down in the priority list. Because likely that business value will change, and it's okay to change it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the other thing I want to add to this is this. You don't have to do this just at the story level. To begin with, you could just start, let's say, at the epic level, say, relatively speaking. But it's not that meaningful that high up, right? So maybe then the next level down, which is what? Features? Whatever it is. Epics.
It depends what you're using at this point, because Jira doesn't have more than 2. Jira only has 2 levels. It only has story and epic level. And I also know other people who have done this by the aggregate of all the business value of all the stories that are under that sub item, regardless if it's feature or epic, would all roll up to become the aggregate business value of the epic. Now, I understand where that model is trying to go. However, when I do a release plan, I decide I'm going to take a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, and I'm going to send them out, because together those are valuable. And I don't really necessarily care about finishing all of Epic A before finishing all of Epic B before moving on to all of Epic C, because like at a certain point we're just recreating waterfall in Agile format, and I'm like, I don't really care about that.
And you've highlighted exactly the fallacy behind rolling up the total, right?
Yeah.
To the parent work item. Yeah. I think ultimately, as the product owner, it's your decision to say what goes into the release, and to heck with, creating some sort of artificial release level count, if you like. That's meaningless.
Right.
What's meaningful though is how valuable is that release to your customer? You don't have to justify it with a number. You know innately.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think that if you're done with a sprint and you can take a total number of business value delivered at the end of the sprint, and then you can track that number from sprint to sprint, because over sprints you'll see it go up or down, just kind of logically as work is turned in, you'll see it go up and down. And when that number goes down significantly, That should be your trigger to say to the business, who may or may not be questioning you, maybe they're not looking at the number, maybe not. But if they are savvy and are paying attention to your business value delivered over time, they'll say, well, Brian, as a product person, why did your number dip in sprint 115 or whatever? And I'll say, well, in early 114, we decided enough was enough and we needed to bring on a new environment to test whatever. We absorbed that between 114 and 115, and that's why the numbers are low, because that stuff doesn't, like, the customer doesn't care that we can test software more efficiently. But for us, it was a huge win, and now we can punch stuff out during the testing phase or during whatever. I could go way off on the rails in that, but the point is we were dealing with some kind of internal technical issue. Doesn't necessarily matter to the people outside absorbing the software, outside, external customers, users, whatever you want to call it. But it is a trigger for the business to ask, what's this dip about?
Right. I agree. And as long as you can have a story behind that, I think that's important. I mean, it could be a plethora of reasons. It might be something like, after 114, we lost a couple of people. They just quit.
Sure.
So a number of reasons. But as long as you can see that, it's a trigger for the business to ask, right? And you should have that communication to say why.
Yeah, but here's the particular thing with business value. Unlike velocity, I am open to the business, the larger business, talking about this number and why it's going, why it fluctuates, and asking me, the product person, hey, why is the number significantly down sprint over sprint? Because we need to have a discussion about why the team is not punching out valuable features.
Right.
This is like a velocity is a terrible metric for this. And I feel it probably proxies for this discussion a lot more than it should, which I never want to be in that discussion. But I feel this is the discussion to elevate. Like, is the effectiveness of what the team is doing felt? And if it's not, let's talk about why.
Absolutely. And one of the things you can actually have a reasonably sound discussion on is the delta, right? So it's your target. This is your target business value for the sprint, collectively added up, all the stories, right? And here's what they actually delivered. Now you can look at that with the team and think about what happened, right? Yeah. And so for team improvement, it's good. The flip side of that, it's also good for you to pick up on, to communicate with the leadership, right? We bought a new tool. They had to learn, so we had to train people up. Obviously, it's going to slow down your business delivery. I mean, whatever the reasoning behind that is. But I think underpinning all of that is the fact that it is not the dev team members that are being, quote unquote, whipped to increase their throughput.
Yeah.
It's really the product owner making decisions based on business needs. The business needs are that the dev teams are now saying they need a new tool, so we're going to give them a new tool. Right? Or we lost a couple of people, so we can understand why there's a dip in business value delivered. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree. I think that's a good way to go, as opposed to letting the teams decide, because then it will just inflate everything. Yeah.
To kind of give this topic a logical conclusion. Whatever your estimation method is, story points, hours, hashtag no estimates, or whatever, if you want to act like a crazy person, whatever it is, put business value alongside of that for a bit. And I think over time, you'll start valuing your discussion and your estimation of business value more than all the rest of that estimation. And again, just my suggestion, all the rest of the stuff will fade away, and you'll just start having discussions about business value. And honestly, that's probably what you should be having discussions about anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're now focusing away from, I'm going to see if I can get this right. You're focusing away from delivering things right to delivering the right things.
Sure. Yeah. The other thing is, you can see that, like, if you go look at the burn down, I don't know how Azure DevOps works for the burn down. I don't know if it's configurable. In Jira, I know you can just flip a little drop down and you can change the burn down to see it in terms of business value. So you can see on the first 3 days of the sprint, almost all my business value items for the sprint were delivered, and now we're just kind of coasting for the rest of the sprint.
You
To be
feed
like
them something higher.
The idea is like the team knocked out the most important stuff that people are waiting on in the first couple of days, and then they got along to all the real, deep technical things that they need to fix for them, or they need to, bugs they got to knock out, or whatever other things. But like the idea is they got the most important stuff. It's been knocked out. It's out of the way, and now they can concentrate on getting the stuff they need to do done. And you can see that in the burn down. Whereas if you flip the burn down to just story points or tasks delivered or whatever, it paints a completely different picture.
Yes, and on teams that aren't so mature, that burn down of the story points looks like, nothing happening till the end of the sprint. And then
it could.
So I agree. But, regardless of the tooling, Jira, Azure DevOps, I mean, this is fairly simple to track in a spreadsheet if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you want to separate them and try to get right at the heart of the matter. But I mean, the point is it's different audiences care about what's being delivered
for different reasons.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Business value. Yeah, I like a super simple topic. I felt that this one is like most teams are not doing this. I try to do it everywhere I go, and different teams embrace it at different levels, I would say. Yeah. So I wanted to do a quick summary on this topic, and here we are. I feel this is as quick as we can get through any topic.
Absolutely. This has been a good one, but a very critical topic, though,
I think it is. For product people, I feel this is the discussion you need to go through. This is the way that you can decide that what your development teams are doing is effective, as opposed to the only metrics that you have is that the ones they provide you is story points, velocity, that kind of stuff. Is like, how fast are we delivering stuff? Like, how fast you're delivering stuff. Maybe you don't care as a product person how fast they're delivering stuff. The only thing you care about is like the things that are delivered in the first 3-4 days of the sprint. Right. Because that's the majority of the things that your customers care about, and then the rest of the sprint is packed with more technical deliverables. I don't know. But if you are using business value and this podcast has helped you kind of figure it out, or if you're not using business value and this podcast kind of help you figure out how to introduce it, we'd be interested to know how that went for you. So please comment below.
Subscribe and like.
Oh,
That's a wrap.
Yeah, this was a good one.